Okay, now let's get started. So we were looking at a question. Just a second. Okay, so right. Like, let's look at the question one more time, right? Explain how determination of a floating exchange rate differs from that of a fixed exchange rate, right? And in this, we have already explained what is free floating exchange rate. First of all, we defined both the types of exchange rate systems. Then we, made the graph for free floating and showed that no matter what happens, the government will not interfere to maintain a certain value. But that is not true for fixed exchange rate, which we're about to look at right now, right? Okay, so on the y-axis, you will have let's say we were looking at pound per dollar, right? So that is on the y-axis, and whichever currency is the second on the y-axis, that will be on your x-axis. So quantity of dollars will be on the x-axis, right? Okay, now on this graph, obviously, as you know already, we will make the downward sloping demand for dollars and upward sloping supply for dollars, right? So we're looking at the exchange rate from dollars perspective, right? This is what we're looking at. So where the two intersect, that is the initial exchange rate value. So let's say each dollar buys you half a pound. Each dollar buys you half a pound. Okay. Now, this being said, let's assume that this is exactly the same value that the government wants to maintain. This is exactly the same value that the government wants to maintain, right? Okay. Now, let's move on and think about if there is any change in the exchange rate value. Okay. Now, let's assume that for some reason, UK supply increases. UK supply is increasing because, let's say, dollar supply is increasing because, let's say, dollar is importing something from USA is importing something from UK, which means obviously that there will be increase in the supply for dollars. Are you getting me? Are you guys following me? Right? Okay. Now, this being said, the new equilibrium position will be where the new supply curve intersects with the dollar, right? So you can see for yourself that dollar became weaker against pound. So now instead of 0.5, let's say each dollar is buying 0.3 pounds, and that this is weaker than what it was initially. So the government would obviously want to bring it back to the original level which the government wanted to set. This is making sense, right? Now, this thing is known as revaluation. The concept of making your currency stronger is known as revaluation. So when the government does revaluation, what would it do? What would the government do to bring its value up higher from this level to back to the original level where it was initially, and which is the level that the government wants to maintain? So what would the government do? Can anyone tell me? What would the government do, right? So government will reduce supply, right? Government would reduce supply, that is one way of looking at it. But another easier way that we have discussed, right? So in revaluation, students, I think that you are getting a little confused, right? Don't be confused. Every time there is revaluation, there is same mechanism involved. Every time there is devaluation, there is same mechanism involved. So when you have to make your currency stronger, no, that's definitely a possibility, right? But it's very difficult to, to tax, like tariff is a very unpopular political move. If you do that, citizens don't like it, your business people don't like it, and that creates more problems for the country compared to increasing the demand, right? So instead of controlling supply, which is a possibility, and there are a couple of problems with that. Firstly, it's very unpopular move, so businesses will not like it. Secondly, it takes time to show the effect. So whenever you try to control supply, it will take some time. So you impose tariff, it will only be after some time that the result is evident. Are you getting me? But what we have discussed so far, Rabab and Abdul, and even Preet, what have we discussed so far? What is the normal revaluation mechanism that the government does to increase its exchange rate? What is the normal process? Yeah. Think about this, right? So you will demand, the currencies are different in this case. The currencies are different. So you will demand dollars, right? So since you are thinking of making your currency stronger, so this is dollars in this case. So what will the government do? The central bank of USA, which is Federal Reserve, right? They will sell euros and buy, they'll sell euros and buy, sorry, sell pounds and buy dollars, right? So against the pounds that is lying in the Federal Reserve, which is the State Bank of America, they'll sell those pounds so that they can buy more dollars with that. And this is artificially increasing the demand for your currency. So you'll artificially increase the demand for your currency, and you can see that this is your new demand curve, this is your new supply curve. Where are they intersecting? They're intersecting at the same level which the government wanted to maintain. They are intersecting at the same level which the government wanted to maintain. Is there any confusion about this, right? How many of you got this, right? And how many of you also understood the response that I gave to Preet? Think about this. Technically, you can control supply, but I mean, it's not a very feasible thing. And you cannot even predict how much effective would it be to control supply, right? Are you getting me? Because it takes some time to show its effect, right? So you impose tariff today. If there is any deal that is already in place, right? Think about this. So if there is any business of USA that has already made a deal with the business in the UK about any export or import, right? So they will most probably execute that deal because that can't be stopped, right? Due to any change in the government policy, you can't stop that, right? So it will still be executed and so on and so forth. So it's kind of problematic to control your exchange rate through supply. What is much easier and workable and faster is to just artificially increase the demand for your currency. And how would a government do that? By selling the other currency, right? Which is involved. In this case, you can clearly see the other currency was pounds because we are looking everything from dollars perspective. So you sell pounds and you demand dollars, which means that the demand for dollars will artificially increase from D1 to D2, and the new value would be over here. How many of you are clear on this? How many of you are clear on this? Right? If there's any confusion, please ask me again. Right? Is it simple? Okay. Now, this being said, great. Preet, is this clear? Right? So let's look at this. Let's complete off with this first, and then we will. Right. Okay, great. So then I'll explain you again one time that what happens when you're revaluing your currency and what happens when you're devaluing your currency, right? Okay, now this was the example that we just discussed. Let's look at this one more time, right? So in fixed exchange rate, we already know that the government wants to maintain a certain value, right? So it's not like managed where there are two limits between which you want to maintain. It's just one particular value that you want to always achieve. Okay, now if let's assume this was the fixed value that the government of USA wanted to maintain, and for some reason the supply of dollars increased. That can be because of different reasons. Let's say US is importing something from UK. Now, let's say more of Americans are going to UK for tourism, or more of Americans are going to UK for, more investment is being made from USA to UK, which means that the currency supply of dollars will increase, and so it shifts to the right. Now, with supply of dollars shifting to the right from S1 to S2, the new exchange rate is weaker than what the government wanted to maintain. So it is, instead of 0.5 pounds for each dollar, now it's only 0.3 pounds for each dollar, right? Now for that, what will the government do? The government will try to bring it back. And what is the easiest way of doing that? The easiest way of doing that is to increase the demand for your currency. Now, how would you increase the demand for your currency? So first of all, you have to sell the other currency that is lying in the central bank of USA, which is Federal Reserve, right? So the State Bank of USA is known as Federal Reserve. So Federal Reserve would sell the other currency, which is pounds in this case, and buy its own currency so that the exchange rate improves, and buy dollars. So with that happening, the demand for dollars will increase. It will shift from D1 to D2, and the new exchange rate would be back where you wanted it to be, right? The exchange rate value will increase to the level where you wanted it to be. Is everyone clear on this? Is this absolutely clear? If there's any confusion, please ask me. Does it make sense? Okay, now let's move on and let's do the opposite example. Now, in the opposite example, we will assume that instead of increasing the value of your exchange rate, you are trying to decrease the value of your exchange rate, which we have already done, but let's quickly do a recap, right? So let's do a quick recap. Okay, have a look at this. Okay, now let's assume this is the value $0.5 for 0.5 pounds for each dollar, which the government wants to maintain. But for some reason, let's say for some reason, you know, the demand for dollars increases. For some reason, demand for dollar increases. Let's say USA is exporting more to UK, right? So USA is exporting more to UK, let's say the military goods and so on and so forth, right? Now, in that case, when the demand for dollar increases, as you can see from the graph, right? So the new exchange rate value of dollars against pounds will be higher than what the government wanted it to be, right? In that case, the value of US dollars will increase against pounds, and it will, let's say, become 0.6 pounds for each dollar. Now, this is not something that the government wanted to happen. This is not something that the government wanted to happen. Now, you guys tell me, what will the government do to bring it back? What will the government do to bring it back? Who will tell me? Right. Supply dollars, exactly. Excellent. Now, in the case of devaluation, the idea is simple. When you want to make your currency weaker, so you sell your currency. When you want to make your currency stronger, you buy your currency. So they'll sell dollars, and in exchange for those dollars, they'll buy pounds, right? So US will sell dollars, and in exchange of those will buy pounds, right? So when that happens, supply of dollars will increase, and as I'm about to show you over here, it will shift to the right from S1 to S2, and you can see for yourself that the new exchange rate is back to the level which the government wanted to maintain. It's back to the level where the government wanted it to be. How many of you are making sense of this? How many of you are absolutely clear? Is this good? If there's still any confusion, please ask me. Arbab, Preet, is this clear? Okay, just give me a second. I'll be back real quick. Just give me a second. Stay on the call. Then we'll do the next question. Oh, sorry about this. Okay, now let's keep moving. So is everyone clear on this? So are all of you clear with how the revaluation, devaluation things work? Great, perfect. Okay, now let's move to the next question, students. So let me show you the question. Right, so we have just done this question, explain how the determination of floating exchange rate differs from that of a fixed exchange rate, right? Now, one thing that I might not have explicitly said, but I'm saying it right now, right? No, we are not having A2. So we can do it some other time. So what you need to do apart from the graphs, even if you're making graphs, you have to be careful that you're also explaining everything in words. So I don't write full-fledged sentences, but I expect whatever I'm saying, like the way I'm explaining it in the class, you're also explaining it like you would explain like that in your exam. Is this making sense? Right? Okay. Now the next question is, okay, stable foreign exchange rate. Right. Now let's do this one. Let's do this one. Explain with the help of a diagram how a government can maintain a stable foreign exchange rate, right? No. You don't do that. No. You are not expected to write in bullet forms. You're expected to write in full-fledged paragraphs, right? So never do that. Thank you for asking this. But are you clear on this? So never ever on a Cambridge exams write in bullet points. Does it make sense? Unless you are explaining something related to a graph or something. Okay. So read the question carefully and then move to answering this. Explain with the help of a diagram how a government can maintain stable foreign exchange rate, right? Okay, now how a government can maintain stable foreign exchange rate. Okay, now let's get started. So what do you think? What are we supposed to write in this question? How a government can maintain stable exchange rate. What type of two exchange rate systems can we explain in this, right? So since it's talking about stable, I think, but I think we can talk about both. But let's see, what did you understand from this question? So how can a government maintain a stable exchange rate, right? So we had a right of biased answer or balanced. Okay, so you're talking about, I get it. So it should not be biased. So think about it. So you have to write a balanced answer in the sense that totally you can give your own opinions and that is not biased. So think about this. Whenever we'll do more questions like these, where the question says discuss. So if the question is saying discuss, you have to compare two sides that is under consideration, right? So if let's say, what example would be a good one, right? So if the government says, okay, let's take the same example of the topic that we are discussing. If the question says discuss which of the two is better for a country, free floating or fixed, right? So what you will do is, first of all, you'll explain both the systems, that what is free floating, what happens in free floating, then you'll move on and talk about what is fixed exchange rate and what happens in a fixed exchange rate. Is this clear so far, right? Then you have to support one side. Since the question is saying discuss, you have to talk about, you have to give your final conclusion recommendation that which one you think is better, but that should be backed by the arguments that you have already presented. Are you getting me? Right? So you can totally take sides, but it should be balanced in the sense that you would explain both. So when the question says discuss, right? So you have to talk about pros and cons of free floating, right? And similarly, you need to talk about the pros and cons of fixed exchange rate, and only then you will have a balanced answer. And then in the end, you can obviously give your own conclusion that which of the two do you think is better and so on and why. Right? This is making sense. Is everyone clear on this? Any confusion, anything that's not clear, anything you want to ask me? Right? Is this simple? Okay, great. So, right. So if the question says yes, discuss. Now, this is a good question. Think about this. So if it's for 8 marks, so normally for an 8 marks question, the examiner is not expecting you to compare, right? Because it's very targeted. It's worded like this, that, you know, explain the benefits or something, right? So if the question says explain, now this is a very good question. Are you all getting this? So if the action word is explain, then you have to just explain and analyze. You don't compare two things. But when the question says discuss, then you have to talk about both sides. Question asks for analyzing benefits of something. That should be right, drawbacks too. No, no, no. Usually for an 8-mark question, if it just says analyzing the benefits, then you just analyze. But when the question says discuss if this is a good strategy or not, if this is a good policy or not, then you have to talk about both sides of the argument. Is this making sense? Read, is this making sense? So that is what you're supposed to do. Abdul Rahim, Arbab, did you guys get this? So we'll do a couple of questions like these. Now, if there is confusion in this question, let me show you again. Now, this question just says explain with the help of a diagram how government can maintain a stable exchange rate, right? So you don't have to you don't have to discuss that whether it's a good approach or not. You don't have to explain whether it's a good approach or not, right? Because it's not asking you for that. It's just saying A part is saying explain with the help of diagram how government can maintain stable exchange rate, right? Right? But if you look at the B part, that is where the discussion comes in. Discuss whether a government should be more concerned by an unstable foreign exchange rate or an unstable domestic price level. Are you getting me? Now, in this B part, you have to talk about that which of the two is a bigger challenge for the government, whether it's about maintaining a stable exchange rate or is it about maintaining a stable price level, right? Are you getting me? Does it make sense? Is this clear? Right, just give me a minute. Right, okay, now how government can maintain stable exchange rate? Okay, great, perfect. Now let's move on and let's answer this. So in this question, I was thinking that since they haven't specified which type of exchange rate system they're talking about, they haven't specified, they haven't told us whether they're talking about managed exchange rate or whether they are talking about, fixed exchange rate, right? So we can talk about technically both, right? Are you getting me? So technically we can talk about both. So let's get started with this, right? So first of all, you'll say what is exchange rate, right? Now very briefly, right? In 1 or 2 lines. So you'll say exchange rate is the value of one currency in terms of another, and maintaining a stable exchange rate value is one of the government macroeconomic objectives. So if you remember, we talked about this, that there are 5 macroeconomic objectives, which includes high GDP growth rate, high economic growth rate. Then you have low inflation, right? That's another macroeconomic objective of the country, right? Low inflation, low and stable rate of inflation that we just discussed in the previous topic that we covered. Low and stable rate of inflation. Then you have stable, low unemployment. That's also an objective. That's another objective for the government. Low inflation, low and stable rate of inflation, low unemployment, and the last 2 are stable exchange rate and stable balance of payment, right? Low unemployment and stable exchange rate and stable balance of payment, right? So obviously you'll not talk about all of these 5 macroeconomic objectives. I just wanted to give you a recap. That's why I'm writing these on the screen, right? So stable, low unemployment, stable exchange rate, and last of all is your stable balance of payment, stable exchange rate and stable balance of payments, right? BOP. Does it make sense? This is good, right? Okay, perfect. Now let's move on. So first of all, for this question was saying that explain how a country can maintain stable exchange rate value. So first of all, you define what exchange rate is. You'll say exchange rate is the value of one currency in terms of another. And then you'll start off with explaining that why stable exchange rate is important. Just 1 or 2 lines, you'll say stable exchange rate is important because that increase what stable means. So if you want to define that, so you'll say stable exchange rate is where the value of exchange rate doesn't fluctuate a lot, right? So that is another thing that you will write. And then you will directly jump to the main part of the question. Stable exchange rate is when the value of doesn't fluctuate a lot. Right? A lot, right? So after writing this, then you directly jump to the main part of the question, which is saying, how can you do that, right? Okay, now in this question, ideally you should be writing about, so if I would have been attempting this exam, I would have talked about both types of exchange rate, which are useful in this case, which you already know. One is fixed exchange rate, right? That also maintains stable exchange rate value, or you could have also talked about the managed exchange rate, right? So ideally, if you talk about both, that is better, I guess. Right. Okay. Now let's start off with any one of the two. So you will say, what is fixed exchange rate, right? So you will say that there are two exchange rate systems through which a government can maintain more stable exchange rate value, which includes firstly fixed exchange rate and secondly managed exchange rate, right? So you can start off with any one. So let's say we are going with fixed first. So you'll say fixed exchange rate is a system where government maintains a specific value of the exchange rate, and if the value deviates from there, right? So let's say you can also use some examples in your exams always, right? So you can say that, let's say initially if $1 used to buy 100 rupees, right, Pakistani rupees, and then if Pakistani government is maintaining a fixed exchange rate against dollars, every time the value fluctuates from this level, the government will intervene to stop that from happening. And how would government do that? That is also something that you need to explain. So in that case, you'll tell that either the government would be looking to revalue if the exchange rate value goes above this, right? So if the exchange rate value has moved from this to this, right? So think about this. Firstly, my question, if you have moved from this value to this value, which of the two currencies became stronger? Abdurrahim, which of the two currencies became stronger? Dollar or rupee? If from this you have moved to this, which of the two currencies became stronger? Yeah, any guesses? No guesses? Right? Okay, so that should be obvious because now each dollar is buying less rupees. It is the rupee that became stronger. It is the rupee that became stronger and it's the dollar that became weaker. Are you guys getting me or not? Is it making sense? So that's very important to be very clear on the basics. Right? So each dollar is now buying less rupees. So it is the dollar that is becoming stronger and it's the rupee that is becoming weaker. Right? Okay. Now, what I was saying over here is that first of all, you define what exchange rate is. You said exchange rate is value of one currency in terms of another. Then you came and you said that there are two types of exchange rate through which you can maintain a stable value. One is fixed and the other one is managed. So with the fixed, you are maintaining a particular value of the exchange rate. And every time the value of exchange rate moves anywhere stronger than that or anywhere weaker than that, the government will intervene to maintain that initial value, right? So now there are two things that the government would be doing in fixed exchange rate. Either you will be doing revaluation, which means that you want to artificially make your exchange rate stronger, or you will be doing devaluation, which means that you are trying to make your exchange rate artificially weaker, right? Now in the revaluation, what happens in the revaluation, right? Quickly. So we are doing a recap. This is not something new. We have already done this. What do you do in the revaluation? You will just write two sentences, right? So what do you do in revaluation if you want to make a currency stronger? Right? Sell foreign currency and buy your local currency with that. Excellent, Rabab, right? So sell foreign currency and buy local currency. Excellent, right? So every time you have to make your currency stronger, so you sell, let's say dollars in this case, and with those dollars you buy rupees. Right? So when the demand curve of rupees increases, it will obviously become stronger, as simple as that. And what do you do in the devaluation? You do the complete opposite. In the devaluation, you sell rupees to increase its supply, and against those rupees, you buy the foreign currency, which is dollars in this case. As simple as that, right? Great, perfect. Is this simple? Okay, now after you've explained what fixed exchange rate is and how that is used to maintain a stable value, then you should move on and also discuss how the managed exchange rate system works. So you'll say that the difference between fixed and managed exchange rate is only that in the fixed exchange rate, you want to maintain a particular value, whereas in the managed exchange rate, you let the exchange rate float freely within the limits, but when it goes outside those limits, that is when the government will intervene to bring it back to the prescribed levels, Are you guys getting me or not? Right? Okay. Now, have a look at this. So, in the managed exchange rate, again, you can explain this in words that I've just mentioned, that in managed exchange rate, the government will set upper and lower limits as long as the exchange rate value is within the limits. The government doesn't care, the government doesn't bother, the government doesn't interfere. But when it goes outside those limits, that is when the government will intervene to bring it back within the limits, right? And then you can also make a graph that we have just seen. So you draw the original supply and demand curve. Demand curve will be downward sloping like this. Supply curve will be upward sloping like this. Wherever the two are intersecting, that will be your original. That will be your original exchange rate value, and then you set the upper and lower limits. So that will be your upper limit, which goes like this, and then you'll be lower limit like this. So as long as it's within the limits, you don't care. So let's say if the supply has only increased by this much, so if the supply of your currency has only increased by this much, since it is again within the limits, you don't care about it. But if it would have gone outside the limits, then you would have cared, right? So if the supply increases by this much, right? Now this is definitely lower than the lower limit, right? Lower than the lower limit. And what is the mechanism that you'll use? You'll use the same mechanism that you were using in fixed exchange rate system, where you sell foreign currency and you buy local currency, right? So you sell foreign currency, you buy local currency, which means what? When you do that, the demand for your currency will increase and it will come back to the within the limits that you had set. How many of you are getting this? Is this clear, students? Is it making sense? Right? So, great, perfect, right? What about Abdul Rahim? Abdul Rahim and Preet, is this clear? So this is what you have to do always, that you have to read the question carefully, see what the question is asking, then answer it accordingly, right? And once we start attempting part B, right, Preet? So when we start attempting part B, then you'll understand that how do you do the analysis, right? How do you compare the two things, and then you give your final conclusion or recommendation. Easy. Okay, so I think that is all for today. Tomorrow, if we right, upload thing is fixed. Yeah. So the folder is automatically being synchronized, and the video should be available like the next morning. So this video will be available next morning, right? Is this clear? Right? So tomorrow will not have AS, so I'll meet you on Sunday. Sorry, I'll meet you on Monday. But if I could make time, I'll see if we can do a class tomorrow for A2, right? I'll keep you posted. Okay, thank you so much. Take care. Allah Hafiz. Bye. See you on Monday.